right, we are going to try this again. So, Chris, can you say something?
How you doing, Mark?
I can hear you. That's a
Yes,
good
finally.
sign. Now, can YouTube hear you?
I hope so.
We should warn them. He has a lot to say. And yes,
Yeah.
Paul, you are first this time. I don't know it was first last time because I had to delete the entire video because of technical difficulties. But I think we are now good. Okay, I'm getting some pictures sent to me to share in the broadcast. So
Awesome.
I think we're going to be good to go here. Chris Meckley from ACI Aquaculture
Yes, sir.
is here, and ACI stands for.
Amanda, Chris, and Isabel, Isaac.
Isn't that nice?
My wife, my 2 kids, and myself.
So it's ACII.
Yes, it is ACII. Well, Isaac ended up coming along, and we were just like, okay, we'll just name him. We liked Isaac, so it actually worked out perfect. So
It's a good name.
that's the meaning behind the company name.
It is a good name. So today we're going to talk about aquaculture, about Kalkwasser, which is something that I've been telling you guys stay away from at all costs. It's too dangerous. And Chris loves the stuff. And I was like, he says, I want to do a YouTube about Kalkwasser. I'm like, oh, I'm the perfect channel to have this conversation. So Chris, let me start the stage, or let me set the stage. I will start with the argument, and then you can counter it and cancel it all out and tell me how stupid I am. How's that? Does that sound good?
Sounds like a
I've
plan.
always felt that Kalkwasser is messy and it's dangerous. And I read hundreds of threads in the early 2000s of people crashing their tanks. The entire tank turned to milk, and everything was dying, where they were reaching into milk trying to find anything alive, fish or coral, to hopefully save it. And the reason I feel it's so dangerous is because it has a pH of 12, and our tanks run, we like to be shooting for 8.3. So if we hit 12 and everything turns milky, I mean, by 8.5, 8.7, your corals are already stressing, and you'll see these fibers coming off the corals really badly. And usually it's because of an overdose. Something really went wrong and way too much went in at once. And then, like I said, it's messy. You have to clean up the vessels that you're mixing it in. You have to get rid of the sludge. You want to make sure you're putting the clear liquid in, I believe, unless Chris tells me wrong. And then you're also going to have to deal with what happens to your pumps. The calcification that happens on the magnet. So these are the things why I don't like it. Now, Chris, tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, I'm not sure about all of the calcification on the magnets and stuff like that. I've been running a Kalkwasser method that I have actually come up with. That is, we had an ultimate goal of boosting suppressed pH, and Kalkwasser was always my go-to for that. And I could never dose the correct amount of Kalkwasser to keep the pH where it needed to be. And I kind of stumbled across this method just because instead of actually dripping Kalkwasser into the system, we dosed the Kalkwasser into the system. And my friend Chris Wood from Captivate Aquaculture is the one that kind of got me on the path of doing it the way I do it now. I just kind of tweaked his advice to make it work. What we learned, our ultimate goal was to get our pH to be stabilized in our systems. Being that we're an aquaculture facility, we want stability all across the board on everything as best as we possibly can achieve it. And in an open air environment, you wouldn't think I would have issues with suppressed pH, but we do. So I did Kalkwasser for many years, but we only did like a barrel that we would just do it on a drip. And it would drip 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And, my pH was still quite suppressed, and I wasn't getting out of it what I wanted to. And if I ended up adding too much Kalkwasser, we had diluted salinity. If I added not enough, for my top off, and the salinity would rise, and I wasn't achieving any kind of goal. It was kind of just, a crapshoot. You never knew what was going to happen from day to day. And that is, really what I think biggest misconception about Kalkwasser is, it really is simple if you do it the way we do it. I've played with it for so long that Apex has allowed me to do it on a more refined or controlled way. Mm-hmm. And we've been doing this method now for a year and a half, and it works. Our pH is at a flat line of 8.3, and it has been for the last year and a half on the first system we started it on.
Mm-hmm.
And it peaks out at like 8.36, and it starts dosing according to the rule in the apex at 8.29. Now, we didn't just program the rule at 8.29 because the pH was only peaking at like 8.15. So Kalkwasser, if it's mixed correctly, you shouldn't have any sediment in the bottom of the vessel that you're using. If you're using a good high purity Kalkwasser, you will get at 6.5 grams will completely dissolve in the purified water that you're using to top off your system with. And your pH of that solution will be at 12.4 to 12.44. That is maximum saturation of Kalkwasser in room temperature water. Mm-hmm. You can achieve higher pHs and dissolve more if your water that you're using and are dosing is colder. If you go above, say, 82 degrees, then your pH might only peak out at 8.2 or no, 8.25 to 8.3 because Kalkwasser is a divalent cation and needs to have consistency in the temperature in order for it to stay in solution. So between 68 and 82 degrees is roughly what people consider to be somewhat room temperature. Right. And we found in those temperature ranges, the Kalkwasser will stay in solution at a 12.44 maximum saturation, and you just need to dose the clear liquid. That's the super important part. Just dose the clear liquid. You can use a caulk stir, but the method that we have come up with will not. I haven't seen it work with anybody with a caulk stir because there's too many variables on a caulk stir. So,
okay, can I cut you off for 1 second? I don't want to over speak you. I want to make sure we're on the same page. And yes. I put the first, I don't know, you can't see my screen at all, right? Or you can?
I can see the screen, yes.
So you see that I put your modifier interval image in the middle of the screen?
Correct.
Okay, so did you want to explain what that is right there, and then I can switch it to the next image?
Okay.
Or do you want both on the screen at the same time?
We need to explain Apex programming really quickly for how we do it. And then I can explain why it says 90,000 mLs in there. And people are looking at that going, wow, that's a lot.
Good point. Okay, I'm going to cover my face here because I'm going to put the other one up here at the same time.
There you go.
Let's see.
So in order to achieve the goal of a flatline pH, programming is key. And that simple rule that is right there is key. Mm-hmm. I get people continuously telling me they're doing my method, and they have like 5 other things mixed into that rule, and it hinders the Kalkwasser dosing to be done the way we do it. Mm-hmm. We want to dose our 100% evaporation for a 24-hour period of time with Kalkwasser solution that is maximum saturated at a 12.4 pH.
Okay.
In order to achieve that, and there's a lot of variables in there that are going to be explained really quickly that are the reasons why the programming in the Apex is done this way. Mm-hmm. So the simple rule is if pH is at 8.29, then off, okay? For somebody starting the method, they're not going to program the 8.29 in there. They're going to have way over dilution of their salinity because they're not even close to the 8.29 on an average pH for their day. Mm-hmm. So anybody that wants to use this method needs to use this rule, but the pH value in it needs to be according to what their Apex is telling them their average is for that day when they started. And then every day they need to look at the average and see how it rises. And then they need to put that new average in that rule daily until they achieve the average pH of between 8.25, and I don't recommend anybody go above the 8.29. Because seawater is 8.3, I don't want my pH to go above there with me dosing something. I want it, if it's going to rise above that, to happen naturally during photosynthesis. And that rule does not allow Kalkwasser to be dosed during photosynthesis. Mm-hmm. It only doses when the lights are out. So gets us to the modified interval here. Mm-hmm. Once somebody that wants to use this method knows their exact evaporation, And if they're doing it in gallons, they need to convert it to mLs, because that's the way Apex is told to, the way Apex is programmed to dose.
Yes.
And it needs to be programmed for the 24 hours. Starting at midnight and ending at 23:59.
Right.
Add, and then whatever their evaporation rate is in mLs, double that. It will not dose double what your evaporation is if this rule is correct and programmed in your dose pump that is for your Kalkwasser dosing.
So are you saying that 90,000 milliliters is half of what you need to top off daily?
No, that is double what I need to top off daily.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I misunderstood what you said.
Yeah, so because of that rule in the advanced section for that tells it when to start dosing and when to stop dosing.
Right.
It basically, when it goes below the 8.29, after my lights go out,
yeah,
it starts dosing, and then it's usually about an hour and a half after my lights go out, my pH gets below the down to the 8.29 mark, and then it's usually about an hour and a half after the lights come on. But I just leave the rule in play and let the Apex do its thing, and it really is set it and forget it, other than monitoring your vessel that you're using to hold your Kalkwasser solution.
Okay.
The key is a vessel, not a caulk stirrer.
Right.
The reason why I said, and there's nothing wrong with a caulk stirrer. They do work. They will help tremendously, but they will not work consistently with the method that we are using, because there's too many variables with the amount of water going in, whether you topped off the Kalkwasser in the caulk stirrer when it was needed to be topped off to keep that pH at maximum saturation inside the caulk stirrer. So I wanted to do a live video yesterday explaining that if, there's a lot of ways to do Kalkwasser, but if you want to achieve the goals like we've achieved with the flatline pH of average 8.3, this is the only way that we have found it to work. I've had so many people call me and tell me they're doing my method and they're using a caulk stirrer, and I asked, and they can't achieve the goals. And I say, it's because you're using a caulk stirrer. That's the reason why. Amanda sent you photos of the caulk vessel. We use a 44-gallon brute.
Right. That's what's on either side of your face right now.
Yep. And inside of that trash can is, of course, the caulk solution. And then, because you only want to dose the clear liquid, and you don't want, we do get settlement after time because of atmospheric CO2. Atmospheric CO2 is the devil to Kalkwasser solutions. So the vessel that you're using should be sealed as much as possible so that air doesn't exchange over the solution continuously.
Right.
Only displacement happen. You only want air to go into the vessel when displacement is happening as you're dosing the Kalkwasser and removing it from the vessel. Yeah. And you will get a small film of it's like crusties on the surface, which is actually carbonates that are formed because of the CO2 in the air reacting with the Kalkwasser.
Yeah, I knew we didn't want the skin to get in the tank, and as far as I know, we don't want the sludge to get in the tank, just the clear liquid.
The skin's not going to really hurt anything because it's not enough to really adjust your alkalinity value, and it won't really do anything for your pH. But because of the way we do it, and I just stumbled across this because I was having problems with a little bit of the sludge getting into the dosing pump and clogging it up. We put the styrofoam on the surface, and the best thing you can do is to make that styrofoam float as big as possible. So that means when air does come back into your vessel for displacement, the less surface area that CO2 gets to touch of that solution, the less contaminated your caulk solution will become. So Amanda flipped up we put the little legs on there so that in case we don't top off the vessel with Kalkwasser and RO water, that if it gets down to that sludge, it doesn't actually pull the sludge in. That's what the little legs, the little PVC legs are on there for. So
that's what I figured.
Yeah. So the bigger you can make that to cover the diameter of your caulk vessel, the less surface area of the solution is exposed to the air, which means you'll have a longer lasting solution. So, we usually, in the summertime here, we get very little evaporation because of the humidity.
Yeah.
And I have other means to be able to keep my pH stable, but for hobbyists, Kalkwasser works extremely well, and there's no reason to go to the extreme like I do, because it's not something to mess with a small system. We're using 2,000 gallon to 5,000 gallon coral systems with our method, and
Yeah.
Kalkwasser works extremely well, especially in a closed environment like homes.
So let me throw out some ideas. First of all, I wanted to say I like your idea of the float. That was great. And I have a suggestion that might work, might not. You might say, no, 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 can't do that. But I want to throw it out there to you. What
Sure.
if you had the legs in the bottom of the barrel so that the float just comes down to hit the legs instead of having to lift the legs up and down every time?
No, I mean, believe me, it's a battle keeping those little legs in there, and I don't know why I didn't think about that, but that's a simple solution. Just take make a little round PVC with little legs sticking up, and then it will never go down into it. That's perfect.
Yeah, as long as the float always lands on top and can't somehow get next to it and go wonky accidentally. Obviously you want to land on the legs, but if you had a big circular piece of foam, that one's kind of hex. If you had a circular one that matches the circle of the barrel, in theory, that pizza would come down straight. And if you had the legs underneath standing, I don't know, 3 inches tall, the sludge would never, and then you've got your tubing in the float, and you've got your tubing in there where it's just coming out a little bit, not as far as the legs. So that's why I was trying to show it so everyone could see it. The tubing is maybe an inch out, but the legs look like they're out about 2 inches, maybe 2.5. And
Correct.
so if you have the tubing just at the base of the foam, and the tubing never snags, the whole float can rise and fall, but it would hit those permanent legs. Now, the only downside is when you're trying to clean out the barrel, your legs are in the way. So you have to remove the apparatus, wash out the sludge, put it back in. But I think that might be a nicer method, maybe.
No, I like it, Mark. I mean, I'm always open to ideas, and I get a lot of flack for saying that this is the only way to do Kalkwasser. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this is the way we do Kalkwasser, and this is the way we achieve a flatline pH of 8.3. I mean, if your ultimate goal is to boost your pH to 8.5, like I hear people doing, which I can't wrap my head around that, because seawater is at 8.3. I know I even had my divers in Australia go out into the Swains Reef when they're collecting acros. I say, give me a pH reading of what you're getting in the evening, and then get me one in the morning. I want to know what happens in the ocean. And, is the ocean acidifying as bad as they say it is when you're out on a reef that's, 100 miles offshore? And the answer is no. The pH of the reef on the Swains Reef, 150, 200 miles off the coast of Australia, has a pH of 8.3 in the morning, 8.3 in the evening, and 8.3 in the afternoon. It is consistent. It is stable.
Cool.
And
I like that.
it is. I mean, that's the great thing about what I do. I love the fact that I have great relationships with my supply line around the world. I can ask them questions that most people don't have access to. And it helps me to wrap my head around what happens in our systems too, because I even have them take alkalinity readings. And why we keep our alkalinity at 8.3 to some people 11, 12 is beyond me, because the Swains Reef's at 6.2 alkalinity. And that's pretty consistent. Calcium's at 390, 399, 400. Magnesium's at 1200, 1290, depending on where they are, how close to the shoreline they are. So there's a lot of things that I could never understand, because I always knew what natural seawater parameters were. And the reasoning why I think a lot of people keep their alkalinity higher is because their pH is so suppressed. And I think personally, from my experience, pH dictates everything in your system.
I'm going to show you something here. It's going to make your mind blow.
I want to hear them all.
There is my, that's my pH right now. Now, obviously, you can ignore that spike.
Right.
That was me calibrating the probe, because I'm like, come on, my pH can't be this. So if we look at the very bottom there, it shows my low is 7.76, so we can call that 7.8. And then my high is about 8.03 right now. So I'm about 0.3 too low on my tank full time. And you see, before this pH probe, I had a different pH probe that told me I was 8.1 to 8.3 every day. So I thought, okay, that's good. But then I replaced the probe, and now it's saying I'm 7.8 to 8.0. And I'm like, oh. So I've been kind of saying that's not true. My reef is happy, which it is. I mean, you've seen the corals. The corals are doing well. So I ordered from you a bottle of your 8.3 magic, your elixir from Reef Blueprint.
9.2, and then the 9.2 and the 9.35, that's just alkalinity, and then the pH value is of the 9.2, which helps keep your pH up
Well,
a
I
little
thought
bit.
I'd try that one out as some kind of an additional handmade. I just want to sample it and see what it does. And if it works, great, and then I can get a larger amount from you. But if it doesn't make a difference, or I make some other change in my system to maybe bring it up a little higher, I'm never this low, and it's been this low for the last couple of months. But yet the whole reef continues to live.
What do you bring any outside air into your protein skimmer intake for
No,
air
that stuff's
intake?
110 degrees. I ain't getting no hot air in my house.
You'd be surprised though, just
Yeah,
pulling the air for your protein skimmer in, that will make a difference. I mean, how much of a difference is it going to make
yeah,
is all dependent upon, every year, different times of the year, it's going to
yeah.
be lower, CO2 levels in
It's
the
true.
atmospheric air, as well as how many people are in your house at any given time,
Yeah,
and pets. All of that play has a big play. And
right.
I actually had one of my customers say that in his fish room, which was in a spare bedroom,
Hmm.
he ended up putting a lot of house plants in that room. And he said, because I suggested that to him, and he's like, that's not going to do anything. And believe it or not,
You made a
it
difference.
made a difference. It was
Wow.
only like a 0.05 difference in pH, but
Hmm.
you were mentioning, we were mentioning pH here, and
Yeah,
it's only a point 0.3,
right.
it's only point 0.3 low. But what people and most people don't know, because nobody's explained it to them, is for every point 0.1 your pH is suppressed below. Say, I'm going to use the Kalkwasser as an example. If
Yeah.
your pH in your calc solution is at 12.34,
Hmm.
not at 12.44, you're 10 times less potent. 10 times. So that
Hmm.
means you will be dosing about 10 times as much to achieve the goal.
Hmm.
If your pH in your reef tank is an average of 8.0, it's 30 times less of what it is in the ocean.
Yeah.
So corals adapt very well.
Hmm.
And they've been around way longer than we have been, and they're going to be around a lot longer than we ever will be.
Right.
And they're going to adapt to whatever conditions they are given. Um, so when we put them in our aquariums and we don't have a stable pH at natural seawater levels, over time these corals adapt to it. They learn to grow and
Hmm.
still do extremely well, but there's still always the overabundance of carbonic acid in your water column that you and I both can't see, but the animals can.
Right.
So it actually suppresses growth. And, I've heard it's not necessarily about the growth aspect of it, but it's about your corals can survive in the conditions that they have if your pH is not 8.3.
Hmm.
I'm not saying they're not going to. I love how people put words in my mouth. It's never been about that for me. It's always been about me being a complete geek and loving what I do, loving the animals, and how can I make them thrive,
Hmm.
not just survive.
Yeah.
And we farm corals at ACI. We import corals, and our goal is to not have losses from the imports, which has been something that we've been working on for so long. And now that we do what we do with our pH, I see huge things from imported corals that are stressed, that we used to just write them off. We knew we were
Hmm.
going to lose them. No matter what we did to them, we were going to lose them. Now that the pH is not suppressed and it's a flat line of 8.3, we're finding that different methods of dipping, antibiotics, all these different things, when a coral comes in milky, dirty water, they're going into a pH of 8.3 where they're used to, and it's not stressing them more until they adapt, because they don't get a chance to adapt because they're just already on their way downhill anyhow. This gives them more of a fighting chance. And then we help them along with antibiotics or chemiclean baths, or even just, anti-parasitic baths, or other things that we've come up with. And our success rate on imports is phenomenal. I mean, I couldn't be more happy about the progress that we've made with the import side of the corals. And then, minor little issues that we found that were on our coral farm. that we, had corals that were in our care for a decade,
Hmm.
that, for no reason we get like this chalice that is just the turtle at growth. And we're just so happy that 5 years after we have it, it's getting bigger and bigger. And, one day we'll be able to offer it up as a coral to sell. That's
Right.
aquaculture. And then that chalice disease gets in there and that little
Hmm.
white band starts coming in going, what is this?
Yeah.
The pH eliminated that.
Hmm.
And it blew my
And you said
mind.
flatline so many times that I really thought your pH is 8.3 around the clock. But Amanda sent me a few screenshots. I just took one. I don't know if I'm supposed to share all four. But
Yeah, no, I mean,
it is showing your low is 8.24, your high is 8.33. You are very close to 8.3 at all times.
and the reason why we were at 8.24 was because I ended up having, we have to, because of where we are and my addiction to corals and my over abundant biomass in the water volume, I have to use other means to help keep the pH at the 8.29 mark. And I use other means. I'm not going to say what they are because I don't want people going out and getting them, because they're very dangerous, way more dangerous than Kalkwasser is.
Yeah.
One drop every 3 seconds is what I put in to help the Kalkwasser out. And I ran out of that the one night and didn't realize it. I think it was just 2 days ago. And that's why the pH was at 8.24, but normally it's like 8.28
Wow.
to 8.33.
Yeah, that is
So
a very small margin.
and that's what our goal was. And we achieved it. And I want reefers around the world to be able to achieve this because the benefits of it are amazing. But the problem with our method
Hmm.
is, and the things that people can't wrap their head around, is the spike that you get in alkalinity.
Yeah.
And I just sit back with a big smile on my face because I remember what happened when we started doing Kalkwasser with the dosing method we're doing. My alkalinity rose to like 11.8, and I'm freaking out because I was always programmed that alkalinity is what you have to worry about. And now I'm programmed to say that alkalinity is the least of my worries. It's the pH, because carbonate buffers are not all created equally. And I'm not here to bash any company, because all of the carbonate buffers that are on the market, they do exactly what they're supposed to do.
Hmm.
But what we've found in our systems, with the amount of carbonate buffers that we would need to be using, I wouldn't be able to farm corals. I go broke. I mean, we saved $15,000 the first year we started dosing Kalkwasser in calcium reactor media and alkalinity buffer and calcium and magnesium. I mean,
Hmm.
for an average hobbyist, if say they were spending, $1,500 for say, they'd be down to, spending $150 in Kalkwasser, or
Yeah.
or even less than that. And if they can ever get their psyche to stop worrying about the numbers,
Yeah.
per se, the numbers, in my opinion, from my experience, are only there to make your head feel good.
Hmm.
Everybody worries about the numbers, but they don't look at their corals.
Yeah.
And their numbers are all over the place with Kalkwasser dosing, and your pH is stable. Again, the most important parameter, in my opinion. Your pH is right on the money, but your alkalinity is at 12.
Yeah.
And that's all they can get their head around because of all the information that's out there that you have to worry about your alkalinity. When I finally let go of that number, that one number, alkalinity, my life got so much easier, so much less stressed, because I wasn't about to stop what I was doing, because I was in the middle of a process that my friend Chris Wood, who is a marine scientist and understands the chemistry of a reef aquarium, a chemist can tell you one thing, but if you don't understand the biology correlation with the chemistry means nothing, in my opinion and from my experience. So you can go by black and white numbers that chemistry tell you, but if your corals aren't happy, then what good is the chemistry?
Yeah.
And what good are those numbers that you're trying to achieve?
Hmm.
If you get your pH stabilized at an 8.3 consistent average using Kalkwasser, and your alkalinity goes through the roof, and you can let go of that number because your corals are saying, I am happy, don't do anything, please don't do anything, or we're happy. then in time, all of the Kalkwasser that has gone into your system that is keeping that pH stabilized and your carbonic acid level at a very minor amount, all of the carbonate ions that are in your rock, in every pore, in every crevice, that have been bound up by carbonates or by carbonic acid, will slowly be released and still be created by the Kalkwasser. So you're creating carbonates with the Kalkwasser dosing, and you are releasing carbonates because your pH isn't allowing carbonic acid to build up. The combination of those two will cause your alkalinity to rise. When all of the carbonate ions that are bound up in your system because that little devil called carbonic acid are done releasing those bound up carbonates, your carbonates will eventually start to slowly fall down, and you will eventually either have to use your calcium reactor again, or you will have to start dosing a quality source of carbonate buffer. That is going to be different in every single aquarium system that is out there. It is different in all of my systems, and we've got 7 that we're using this method on. I still have one that's still at 11.08, and it's been a year and 3 months, and it was at 13.6 for 9 months, the first 9 months, and I just said, I'm not even going to worry about it. I put
wait. I want to make sure I understand what you're saying here. You have an aquarium that was at 13 alkalinity, right? 13 DKH?
13.6.
And you've not dosed any alkalinity. You've just been doing the Kalkwasser method.
Kalkwasser.
And in 9 months or 11 months or something, it came down to
11.
So basically, it didn't budge. Where I'm constantly adding alkalinity through my calcium reactor 24 hours a day, and if I turn mine off, mine would plummet because of the lack of pH.
Correct.
And, there was a thread that surfaced in my, I stumbled, I heard there was a conversation. I think Randy Holmes Farley was the one saying, if we cared more about pH, and I mean, I literally have written an article on my website that says, stop chasing pH. And I'm thinking, maybe I've had that wrong for 10 years. So, I never say this is the only way, because there's always so many ways of doing something. But it does make, and I've said on this channel, so no one's going to call me a hypocrite today. I've said many times if I were to ever dose Kalkwasser, I would mix up a batch, and I would hook up like 1 gallon that could then drip into my system overnight. Just so nothing can go wrong. It's only a gallon. And that way I've limited my risk.
It'll help you. I mean, there's nothing wrong with somebody that is, I mean, you will eventually learn, and when I get you convinced that you should be doing that 1 gallon dripped into your system overnight, actually, I just recommend you put it on a dosing pump and have it dose in, overnight while your lights are out, and watch your pH rise.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it'll rise because, like I said, pH of 12, or you're saying it's even higher than 12.
Your alkalinity will go up too. I mean, it will add alkalinity value to your system. Just don't worry about it if it goes above where you like to keep it. I tell everybody that's doing the method and they're listening to my exact method.
Yeah.
I can help people with my exact method, but I can't help people with that's using and tweaking my method, because I've already tweaked it. I've been there. I've been through all the scenarios, and it's relentless for me to continuously explain to people my method followed exactly will achieve your goal. If it's not being used with a standalone mixing vessel, which is the biggest problem that people have to wrap their head around, because they don't have the space to put a mixing vessel that will dose for an entire week.
Yeah.
The great thing about the Apex dosing pumps is you can put that thing 30 feet away. Yeah. So if you can run it through your wall and out to your garage, done. Do it. Because it will pull the solution in. Then you don't have a mess in there if you accidentally drop some Kalkwasser powder on your floor, which I can understand that's a royal pain in the rear end. Plus, you got to clean it up. You really don't want it to get on your hands because it is caustic. It's a pH of 12.44 can really mess your skin up. And I don't recommend anybody putting their hands in Kalkwasser solution. I mean, it's not going to hurt you like, say, some of the stuff that I'm using to help.
Like muriatic acid.
Like what?
Yeah. Like muriatic acid.
That's exactly the opposite. Yeah, that's horrible. That'll.
Right.
I wouldn't want to put my hands on muriatic acid, although it's been on my skin and I know what it
Yeah.
feels like. It's not fun.
Same here.
And the stuff that I use that's more potent than Kalkwasser, I've gotten that on my skin, and it took over a month for my fingers to stop cracking and bleeding. And I learned my lesson. I got lab grade equipment and goggles and gloves and everything to mix that stuff up. But
Smart.
the method works is the bottom line. If it's
Okay,
followed,
let me ask you some things here then, because I don't think if you said it, remember, you're saying a bunch of stuff that I absolutely don't want to believe in. So, and let's say that tongue in cheek. So while you're saying it, I'm not actually comprehending all of it. Did you say earlier how much to mix up to create your numbers? You were talking about grams, but I didn't quite follow that. So like you have a 44-gallon container. How about 1 gallon or 1 liter or whatever number you're using? What is your number to number so we understand the baseline?
Okay, Kalkwasser is not all created equal. And that's another big misconception about Kalkwasser. I mean, depending on the quality and the purity of it is going to determine whether you can actually use 6.5 grams of Kalkwasser powder in 1 gallon of RO water.
Okay.
If it is quality, will dissolve completely and be crystal clear, maybe a minimal amount of sediment at the bottom that's not even going to be anything you're going to notice.
Okay.
If it's of quality.
Yeah.
The other thing about Kalkwasser is it can be ruined or compromised very quickly by the atmospheric air around you.
Yeah,
So,
that I remember you saying. You said keep a lid on it, keep it sealed.
exactly. Now the powder itself, the Kalkwasser powder, needs to be in a sealed Ziploc bag where you can squeeze all the air out. Every time you open it, you're compromising a little bit of it.
All right.
You know, you're using it, squeeze all the air out of it, and seal that bag back up. I'm so anal about it. I put it in the Ziploc. It's in the Ziploc bag. I squeeze the air out. Then I stick it inside of a little 2.5-gallon bucket with a rubber sealed lid.
Yeah.
Down inside of a 5-gallon bucket with a rubber sealed lid.
Wow. That is anal. Triple protection. Okay.
It's redundancy. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I'm dealing with. I don't do it anymore. I've got a really good employee now that understands the importance of everything I explained to him in detail, and that is the key for me to releasing that task to somebody, which was really hard for me to do because I did it in the past with another employee, and I would constantly go back and check them. And my Kalkwasser solution, after they came to me and told me it was maximum saturated at 12.4 to 12.44, I'd go put my pH pen in there. That's a handheld Milwaukee MW102, which has the pH probe and the temperature probe, because pH and temperature run hand in hand. If your temperature is different than what your calibration of the pH probe was, you're going to be reading different readings than what it really is.
Yeah.
So that's the other key thing, is using a good pH probe that measures temperature at the same time, so that whatever you calibrated it at, it can compensate for it. So I would go around and check him, and 12.25, 12.3, and I've explained it over and over and over again, and nobody would listen to me properly, and I would be overdosing my systems. My salinity would be falling, and I'd be just wanting to pull my hair out. This guy is like,
all because it wasn't 12.44?
Yes, because if it's at 12.34, it's 10 times less potent.
Yeah.
So
now,
that means I have to roughly 10 times the amount to achieve the goal.
In the past, when people were doing Kalkwasser, they were using vinegar to help it dissolve. Is that part of your equation?
It doesn't work. It doesn't help dissolve it anymore. You know, people think it helps it dissolve, but it actually doesn't. It's a divalent cation and can only dissolve so much in liquid. So that's the reason why vinegar will not work to help dissolve more of it. It could be basically, it does, but as soon as it goes into the salt water, it basically then it falls out of the solution and goes back into its original form, which then means you're getting undissolved Kalkwasser into your system, which can actually potentially be a disaster, because it's going to raise your pH even more than what you wanted it to. And that can be a recipe for disaster. It's too many variables that control that. I don't want to be a part of those variables, because those variables can be detrimental to all the animals that we've been working on keeping and growing for so long. So
Okay.
I go by what the science says. The
Yeah.
science doesn't lie. And if people want to do it a different way, I want no parts of it.
So why did the mixture they mix up not hit 12.44? Was the water temperature wrong? Was there not enough powder put in? Was it the wrong powder? Was it polluted powder?
I tested the Kalkwasser that they were using, and it was a 5 kilogram bag of Kalkwasser. And when I opened up my bucket and then my other bucket, the bag still was full of air. So over time, that CO2 degraded the quality of the Kalkwasser.
Okay.
So that's why it's super important. These little itty bitty things. I mean, people think that they're so minor and not important.
Yeah.
The little things sometimes are more important than the big things. And that little minor thing that people would say is minor, I call it major, is keeping your Kalkwasser dry and atmospheric air free as much as you possibly can. So all I did was test the Kalkwasser and weighed out 6.5 grams, put it into 1 gallon of RO water, and the maximum that it would get was 12.3. So I took that task away from them, and I started doing it myself. And now.
And how much is 6.5 grams? Is that a cup? Because I know that powder's really light. I mean, how much is that? What's it look like?
I don't really know. I don't know off the top of my head.
A tablespoon? I mean, what would you compare that amount, that gram?
It's about a teaspoon.
A teaspoon. Okay. All right.
Probably more like a heaping teaspoon. We use 55-gallon barrels, and I have a 44-gallon brute.
Yeah, I know you make a bunch, but I was just trying to picture what's 6.3 grams, because like powdered sugar is ridiculously light, and maybe it's a whole cup of caulk for all I know. That's why I was curious what your. But I remember it used to be something like you mix a teaspoon with a gallon, was the old, 20-year ago recommendation.
That's an easy way to do it. That's an easy way to do it. If you don't measure it out to exactly 6.5, that's when you're going to get settlement. If you go over the 6.5, and that's not a problem either. That's not a problem at all, because only the 6.5 grams can actually dissolve in the water. If you go over that, it doesn't mean you ruined that Kalkwasser powder. It just settles to the bottom. And that's why a calc stirrer can work if you make sure you have Kalkwasser continuously in there to make sure that it is being dissolved as water comes in as it leaves.
Yeah.
But there's too many variables there. You cannot keep that in a truly controlled environment because of the water out, water in, and Kalkwasser is the key to keeping things stable there. So that's why we don't use a calc stirrer. I tried it, and it was working. Yeah. And then when the amount of Kalkwasser that was in there got too low, that's when variables were just messing up the whole process.
Because you have less powder, and you have to top off with more, but you don't want that to get in the line. Yeah, it's a whole thing.
Exactly. So that's why the calc vessel that you mix up, and this is for most hobbyists, it's simple. I mean, if you have the room to put in a 5-gallon bucket under your aquarium, now Mark, you probably evaporate more than a gallon a day.
I evaporate 3.6 gallons a day.
Okay, you got it down. So 3.6 gallons. So you, over a period of 7 days, so you only have to do the vessel once, you need something that is about 33 gallons, I would say, 34 gallons. And you can mix up the vessel and you can set it and forget it, as long as that vessel has a good lid going over top of it with it doesn't have to be sealed perfectly.
Right. It needs a little bit of vent. Otherwise, it's going to create a vacuum as it's trying to pull the liquid out.
You need to allow for displacement.
And you're dosing it. You're not using like a pump to push it, like a top-off pump.
Strictly dosing it with the Apex dose pump. And that's why we sent you the pictures of the programming and pictures of the rules. So in your programming, if you were to do this, where I had the 90,000 mLs, you actually would need to take and convert the 3.6 gallons into liters and then mLs, and then you would double that amount. And so you get the exact 3.6 gallons dosed, you would put the rule in play, which was in the advanced section, that says if pH is greater than, to start the method, you put your average in there. So your average, according to that, was at 7.88, which is actually a little bit lower than that because of that little spike. That's where you start off with. Yeah. And then your first night, it'll dose it and it'll never go below that average.
Right.
And then you look at your new average at the end of the day when your lights go out. And okay, my new average is, say it's 8.0. You put that in that rule until you get that rule to say 8.25. I would not go above the 8.29. There's no reason to, because during the photo period, photosynthesis is naturally removing the carbon dioxide, which is suppressing your pH.
Yeah.
So because most people keep their light cycle at 12 hours, that's why you double what's in your apex, because we do the programming at 24 hours.
Right.
If we do not, and we do it from the time, the lights go out to the time the lights come on, the programming doesn't allow enough Kalkwasser to be dosed for each dose to maintain that pH. But because you're doubling the amount that's being dosed in a 24-hour period, but only really is being dosed for 12 hours, that's what keeps the stability there. And that's where the key is with our method. And it is super important to follow it exactly if you want to achieve these
I was going to
goals.
ask you why you're doubling it. Now I see why you're doubling it. So if you're literally, like in my situation, my tank tops off day or night. Whenever it needs water, it just senses it needs water. You're saying put in the 3.6 during the 8-hour night period or whatever it is.
12-hour night period, yep.
Or 12-hour, whatever. Yeah, and just those are the hours. And then the next 12 hours, there's no top off at all.
Nothing. And everybody always says to me, well, what about my salinity? My salinity is going to be lower in the morning. We've been through this here too. I mean, you break it down. Is that tiny little itty bitty salinity swing going to affect your corals? Yeah. It could pour down raining on the Great Barrier Reef where we get acros, and the salinity could drop 3 points because the corals are in shallow water, and we just got a downpour of 2 inches of rain, and the salinity is going to fall there, and it's going to go right back up in a matter of hours when the tides and the currents shifted around. Corals are resilient. They acclimate themselves. It's not going to hurt your corals by having a minute salinity swing, just like it's not going to hurt your corals to have a 1 DKH swing in a day. My DKH swings about 0.08, and that is in the morning. My DKH is higher. As the day goes on, because there's no Kalkwasser dosing, it goes down about 0.08. Sometimes it goes down like 0.15. Yeah. But then when it starts dosing Kalkwasser again, it goes back up. Yeah. But I also have a calcium reactor that is programmed in my apex to run if my alkalinity falls below 8.7.
Yeah, it's funny. Mine is programmed the opposite. Mine is if it gets too high, it stops the calcium reactor because I don't want it to run away from me. I don't want it to go super high.
If you do the Kalkwasser method, and I'm going to convince you to do it, and you're going to be like, wow,
okay,
why didn't I do this
I'm not doing this. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to do this now. I'm in the middle of something right now with my tank. I don't like mixing methods. I don't like adding more things to the equation because then I'm not sure if what I was doing in Project A was affected by Project B. But post-MACNA, like after my MACNA presentation's done, I could see myself possibly leaning into something. But I have a question that has to do with your method, because you're dosing it over, let's say, 12 hours, and you're saying to put this in, but I'm wondering, how are you dosing the amount of fluid? Like, for example, let's say I need to put in, let's just take a round number, 100 milliliters. I want to put 100 milliliters in my system during lights out, but I want it to be 1 drop every 10 seconds. How are you doing that? How are you picking how far apart it is between drops hitting the water is what I was curious.
You don't.
It's just whatever the dose puts out.
The dose pump, according to the rule, because our rule is at 8.29.
Right.
If it's greater than 8.29, off.
Yeah, it can't run at all. But when it's... Because I was reading one of the bottles of stuff I'm playing with right now says to put this in 1 drop every 1 to 10 seconds. I'm like, what dosing pump lets you pick the duration of the drop? I don't know of any that does that. Does the dose do that?
No, it does not. I mean, when we program the amount that we want to be dosed in a 24-hour period, it does a calculation, and it tells you when you go into the interval summary that we're going to dose this many mLs every 10 minutes.
Okay.
Or every 5 minutes.
Gotcha.
Like my monitoring traces are on a dosing pump, and it doses 4.4 mils of my solution every 5 minutes or something. I can't even remember what it is.
Yeah.
No, it's 1.9 mils every 4.4 minutes or something like
Right.
that. So whatever the dosing says that needs to be dosed is what I just let the programming take care of and do it all on its own. And it does a great job. I've never looked past it, and I've never tried to adjust it because it's been working. And I feel like what we've been doing, is there ways I can fine tune it even more? I bet you there is, but honestly, I'm not going to try because I'm so happy with the results that we've gotten from what we've learned and how we program things that I'm going to knock on some wood here, but I set and forget. Except for watching and monitoring my, I also use a trident, so I know tridents are kind of a weird topic with some people, but so are handheld titration kits. They're a huge problem for me. I learned so many things. I was killing corals because I didn't know and realize what the discrepancies were in certain test kits. They're consistently inaccurate. But there's nothing wrong with being consistent, but what is the inaccuracy? And that's where the problem that I had after I figured out how inaccurate the test kits were according to a lab grade testing of alkalinity. My mind went I wanted to just shoot myself because I was relying on again, I strive for the best for the animals.
Right.
And being an aquaculture facility, I should not have been relying on hobbyist grade testing equipment to take care of tens of thousands of animals. I have the funds to be able to buy better equipment. Why was I relying on the hobbyist grade equipment?
Right.
And why wasn't I learning about why the hobbyist grade equipment is great for hobbyists because of the consistency, but I wasn't worried about my animals. And when I learned about the inconsistencies, I preach it to everybody saying, here's what your discrepancies are on this test kit. It's consistent. There's nothing wrong with you using it, but it is going to be consistently inaccurate on your alkalinity. And here's where your inaccuracies can be. They can be from 0.05 to 0.10 in DKH reading.
Right.
So if you know where that is, strive to go, and that's on the high side is what we found. So if you go a little bit higher than where you think you should be keeping your alkalinity, say 0.05, that's better than being 0.05 lower than what you want to be. Being 0.05 higher is way better. So when we learned all of these different things, the tridents became a reliable source of just a consistent reminder of where we are with our alkalinity, our calcium, and our magnesium. And it allowed me to put the rule in play for my calcium reactor to kick on when it went below the 8.7 and to turn off when it went above the 8.7. And my whole theory with alkalinity, once the method is started and you peak at whatever you peak at, don't worry about your alkalinity until it gets down to where you normally kept it before you started using this Kalkwasser method.
Now, when you stop your calcium reactor, what are you stopping? Are you stopping the CO2? Are you stopping the effluent?
I just stopped the CO2. So what ends up happening is, because we have commercial calcium reactors, when I stop the CO2, I still allow the water to flow through it and the recirculation pump on. So the whole chamber empties into the system. And that, with 150 to 250 mLs a minute going through it, and you're talking about, I think I calculated it at like 22 gallons of effluent to leave
per day.
It needs to leave the chamber before the pH rises to what the system is. That continues to make the alkalinity rise, and it usually 6 hours later is at like 8.9. And I'm okay with that because I don't worry about my alkalinity unless it goes below 8.3. And if reefers around the world want this method, they need to let go of alkalinity
Hmm.
being too high. I have and can share with you multiple messages from people that have been like, their heads exploding, but their corals look amazing. My
Yeah,
corals never looked better. Oh
yeah.
my gosh, the colors are getting insane. The polyp extension is amazing. I can't believe I've been wrapping my head around alkalinity when I should have been wrapping it around pH.
Well, we've
And then
been
a
thinking about
month,
alkalinity for 2 decades. I mean, I'd say.
exactly. One person has been promoting that because he's been saying that pH isn't something you worry about, and I never agreed with that. But I
Mhm.
went and I used that method for a long time.
Yeah,
But when it got to be the biggest money pit for my farm,
yeah,
and I was looking at the amount of money I was spending on chasing a superficial alkalinity buffer because I was using one component instead of four components.
right.
It really literally is. It works. It does work. I
Hmm.
cannot say it doesn't work, but for those on a budget,
Yeah,
for those that cannot afford to continuously, as their tank grows and the more alkalinity demand is there,
yeah,
and they're spending $50, $100, $200 a month on
yeah.
alkalinity buffers, well, wouldn't you want to put more corals in your aquarium with that money?
Hmm.
Switch to this method and you'll spend pennies.
Yeah.
And your corals actually, I always say this, your corals will thank you for it because
So
you'll see
I knew
polyp
a
extension.
guy. I knew a guy. I think he was on the East Coast, and he had a big, beautiful SPS reef. Became Tank of the Month, and I remember he showed us his. It was his sump room, I guess I'd call it. It was really under the staircase behind the reef, and I remember he had like the big sump, and then there was like shelf, and there was these things here, but he had two calcium reactors running side by side to keep up with the demand, and so I understand the whole process. We need more alkalinity. We have to have enough alkalinity to keep up. This whole pH thing superseding alkalinity is really, I mean, like I said, when I first heard the thread was floating around, I was like, what? Come on. And I just kind of, shrugged it off because I've been doing this for a long time with reasonably decent results. I mean, yeah, I might have been doing it wrong the whole time, but it's been working. Like I
It
said, there's
does.
multiple ways to do something. So I'm
And
still
that's
trying to understand your entire thing, like your 90,000 milliliters. I did some math. That came out to like 3.7 liters that you put in a 24-hour period, I think it was. So
no,
about a
no,
gallon? No, is that wrong?
90,000, okay, 100,000 mLs is, shoot, what is it? Well, 20,000 mLs is 5 gallons, roughly.
Okay.
So 100,000 mLs is 25 gallons.
Oh,
So
and you have one body of water in your aquaculture facility. It's 5,000 gallons all connected, or you're
no,
dosing. I'm sorry, not yeah. You are dosing Kalkwasser to multiple systems from one floating
no,
disc,
no, we do
multiple
not.
barrels.
I'm trying to find a vessel that will hold enough that I can run it all off of one vessel. But as of
Yeah,
right now, we've got 55-gallon barrels on most of the systems, and we have a 44-gallon brood on one of the smaller ones. I
gotcha.
say smaller, being
Yeah,
1,700 gallons,
yeah,
and that one sufficed for the 1,700-gallon system. But for anything that's 2,000 and up, it's a 55-gallon vessel. And actually, my 5,000-gallon system, I should have over a 100-gallon vessel because I have one dose system, which is two pumps, each programmed to dose 100,000 mLs in 24 hours. But it actually, each one of them only doses about 50,000 mLs in the winter. So I dose about 25 gallons of and that's evaporation,
yeah,
being in open air on a
yeah.
5,000
Because
gallon.
things change summer to winter.
They do,
Yeah,
and it's really difficult. It's been 2 years in November that we've been doing this method. And what I've learned in 2 years, did I have problems? I had major problems last summer.
hmm,
And it was my own stupidity for being complacent when I had a lab um, calibrated floating hydrometer
hmm,
that was calibrated for 77 degrees.
right.
And the thing was just freaking dead on. And I loved it. And I got complacent and I allowed one of my employees to use it. He used it for 3 days and broke it. I He bought a new one for me. And I don't know why. I'd never checked the daggone
Yeah, you didn't
thing.
verify it. Yeah,
And it was literally saying it was reading at 1.026, and it was actually only at 1.022.
So what
At
happens with
7%.
those? Is it that the little card slides down in the tube instead of where it belongs? Is there a way to fix those?
No, there's no way to fix it other than to know what the discrepancy is, and when you know what your discrepancy is, you're okay. But still, that's not good enough for me. I stopped
Right.
using the floating hydrometers. I use now the HANA conductivity probe.
Yeah.
I do not measure in salinity anymore. I measure in specific gravity, 35 ppt. I strive
Oh,
for
that's actually
30.
the opposite.
What's
Specific
that?
gravity is
Oh,
SG.
I always do that. I don't know
PPT
why.
is what you meant is what you're doing.
That's, I measure in PPT.
Yes.
I like my salinity to be between 35
Yeah.
and 36.5.
Yeah.
I don't like it to be below the 35 because natural seawater, in most cases, from the regions we're receiving these corals from, have been living in 35.4,
Yeah.
35.3, which is more along the lines of natural seawater.
Mm-hmm.
That the problem with that particular handheld hobbyist grade piece of equipment is there's so many discrepancies in it, and if you don't know how to use and clean the piece of equipment, you're
Yeah.
gonna not like it. It needs to be cleaned thoroughly
Yeah.
after every use. You cannot use it, just rinse it really good, and then put it back in and let
Right.
it sit. You have to clean it every time. So you have to use it, then you have to rinse it in RO. I rinse it with tap water first,
Yeah.
up inside the little electrodes, and then I dip it in and out of RO water, dump that out, put more RO water in, and rinse it out again. Then I shake it out. If
Yeah.
you don't shake it out, a droplet of water could be up inside there,
Yeah.
which, if it has salt in it, will cause the calibration to be out.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's stupid and sounds like it's a lot of work, but in reality of it, are these animals worth it to you?
Oh, of course.
If they're
Yeah.
not, then don't reef,
Yeah.
because
Don't worry.
it's I mean,
That's funny.
little things that take up little itty bits of time.
Yeah.
If that's a problem, then reefing is not for you, in my opinion, because reef tanks are time consuming.
Yeah.
And if you want to do it right, you got to do everything the proper way, and you
No, I
can't
agree.
cut corners.
No, I agree with you 100% on all of that. I was just thinking, isn't there some easier way to clean that thing? Can't we just throw it in the upper rack of the dishwasher and just let it run?
You can leave it soaking in RO water. That would be one way to do it, because then it won't
Yeah.
ever dry out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of ways to do that, but cleaning that thing and calibrating it frequently is
Yeah.
important.
Yep. Yep.
Very important. The solution for calibration is $1.
Yeah.
I mean, calibrate it once a month.
Right.
We do it every single week because we test, 9 systems in here daily. And I don't want there to be discrepancies, and I test
And
it
you're
at the end.
also ICP testing every week too, right?
I'm lucky. I had during COVID, we shut down our walk-in business, and I had a customer that wanted to meet me, brand new shop, and he's like, "You do curbside pickup?" He's like, I need your assistance. I need to pick your brain on a couple of things. Can I come out and pick up my order?" I'm like, "Of course you can." So he came out every single week for probably 4 months, and I learned that he was a physicist, and I'm going, no wonder you understand all these crazy ideas that I have, and you've been able to help me solve some of my issues because you get it, and you can, that's what you do, that's what you love. And he brought up ICP testing, and I said, don't even get me started on ICP testing. I was going nuts. I'm like, I'm so sick and tired of spending money on ICP testing and getting back bogus results. I'm like, there's no way my iodine level is at 10 times natural seawater, because everything would be dead.
Yeah.
There's no way that, this is too high because things would be dead, and he's just like, I noticed that too, because I do ICP testing, and that's why I wanted to come out and learn how you're doing things, because your corals are amazing.
Yeah.
And I watch your videos and stuff, and he's like, I want to achieve the goals that you're achieving. So he's like, so what's your biggest problem with ICP? I said, well, I'm not going to mention any names, but when I got this harebrained idea to take 2 ICPs, spend double the money, and use the same water and label it as 2 different systems, because these systems were actually about the same water volume,
Right.
but they were completely different. And I said, I'm going to take water from the same one and call it another one. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
They received them on the same day, and I got my results on the same day, which means they used them during the same calibration
Right.
of their ICP equipment that was being used for their run.
Yeah.
And the results were not even close. They were so different. And I actually called the company up and told them what I did.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm just trying to understand how these results can be so drastically different
Right.
on the majors.
Yeah.
The majors was the biggest thing. You know, the calcium was like 50 points different. The magnesium was over 100 points different. The potassium was like 40 points different. I'm like, if you guys are using the machine properly, I said, and I don't understand them myself. I do
Right.
now because of Gene
Mm-hmm.
that owns Reef Labs. I understand them in a lot more detail than what I ever did.
Yeah.
And they couldn't give me solid answers. And I'm like, you know what? How can you justify taking a hobbyist's money
Mm-hmm.
when you can't even explain to me that the tests that were run on two different samples, but actually were the same sample? You can't explain to me why those results are different when they should have been dead on.
Yeah.
With maybe a 2 to
Yeah.
5% discrepancy.
Right.
You know, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But don't have discrepancies of huge numbers
Yeah.
and then not be able to explain it to me and then expect me to want to give you my money again.
Yeah.
And so Gene did the same thing. And he's like, I used to work for the government and I have access to auction sites. And there's these things are being auctioned off.
I
left
thought
and
he was going
right.
to report them to the IRS. I used to work for the government. I know a guy.
Well, he called up his professor that gave him access to these auction sites so that he could actually purchase things for the classroom and for the experimentation that they were doing. And his old professor said, Gene, yeah, have fun. You know, they need to move these things, so have fun. He bought a top of the line ICP OES machine that was, I think, from 2009. And after he researched the model number, he found out the only thing he needed to do to it was to upgrade the software. And that was the reason why they were getting rid of it. The software upgrade was like $5,000.
I was
he's
like, how much could software cost? I had no idea it was $5,000. Okay, keep going.
That's the thing about ICP is that people don't realize that the programming and that is used in them is
Yeah.
very detailed and very specific. And
Yeah.
so he got it, and he had the old programming. And he's like, let's play with this thing with the old programming, you know, and let's see what happens. So he fired it up. We got it running. And then he got the new software. And he paid $5,000 for a piece of equipment that sells for $500,000 or $250,000
Wow.
in this day and age.
Yeah.
So Reef Labs ICP started up with the OES machine, and it took him probably 5 to 6 months to learn all the ins and outs of how the machine operated.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to keep going into details about it because I'll let that happen when Gene goes on to another live stream here in a couple of weeks to explain the whole evolution of Reef Labs ICP. But I can tell you this, that when he did get the OES machine dialed in, I wanted more because halogens and I don't know if you know what halogens are, correct?
Light bulbs.
There's four no there's four elements that are the halogens that are actually extremely difficult to test with OES. And if you cannot dial in the OES machine with the calibration solution that you get and the software and tweaking the machine, the halogens will not give you very accurate results. So iodine is one of them, and I had 10 times the iodine level, and Gene figured out what was going on with my iodine results from that company that I was using by dialing it in. And the best he can get results on halogens is about 20% discrepancy. He's like, and I'll be honest with you, he's like, it took me months to even get it to 20%.
Yeah.
He's like, so when you get your results from Reef Labs, he knows the compensation for the iodine results, and he automatically calculates what it should be with that discrepancy. So he's not giving you 20% higher or lower results than what you are. So he knows the compensation where it needs to be. So he gives you as accurate level as he can possibly give you. So the other one that's a halogen is the fluorine, which I don't recommend anybody mess with unless you can get testing done with a ICP MS machine, which measures in parts per trillion and actually measures the molecular weight of the ions. versus a light reading, which is what the OES does. But it makes a huge difference. So bottom line, when he dialed in everything the best he could possibly do, even after having the plasma generator blow up, and that was $15,000. He didn't have to fix it to get a new one, so he learned how to fix it, tore it apart, put it all back together, put a new capacitor in, and fired it back up. And sure enough, he fixed that, and he fixed 3 different pieces of equipment on that machine that were going to be probably about $50,000 worth of another investment to fix them. He learned how to fix them himself. Being a physicist,
Nice.
You can problem
He's
solve.
Sheldon.
Yeah.
He's
So-
Sheldon.
with OES for reef labs, now the next thing is, which we just got the new solution, the new coolant, because the equipment needs to be cooled as it's running, and because of the plasma that is being used to pulverize the sample. So this liquid was expensive, and him and I came together. We got the liquid for it. Now the MS machine is going to be offered up when he finally dials that machine in, which I can't wait for, because then something that no other ICP company is doing is a total system water volume test for your aquarium.
What does that mean?
All from the sample you send in to have your elements checked.
Is that, well, I did one already, and I'm doing another one on Monday.
You're not going to get it yet. Believe
You're
me.
not talking about that part at the top where it talks about the ratios. You're not discussing that?
No.
Oh.
That's very, very helpful and beneficial for all reefers, that ratios.
Yeah.
There's going to be additives to the test. So basically what we're going to have out, I'm not partners with Gene at Reef Labs, but I am, but I'm not, if that makes any sense.
I get it. I'm partners with Reef Trace, and I've never gotten $1. So I get it.
So when the MS comes available, my buddy Jake Adams came up with this idea, and Gene looked at Jake when Jake met Gene and goes, "That's genius. Yes, we can do that."
Nice.
So what we did was, there's a particular element, and I'm not going to spill the beans on what it is, that is super easy to test for in seawater.
Okay.
We ended up having Chris from Captivate make a solution in an exact specific parts per million for the solution.
Okay.
And we know what the levels are going to be in the reef system from the test itself. We're going to add a specific amount of that element to the sample, which then will be exactly a specific parts per million. And whatever above the parts per million it is, there's a calculation being done when that sample's run, which then we can tell you your exact water volume in your system down to the ounce.
That's crazy. I like it.
Yes.
I like
Me
it.
too.
Because I've been saying
Okay.
450 for a long time using math. So it'd be very interesting to see if I'm close or if I'm way off.
Yeah, no, that I think that's super cool too, because then
It's weird.
the other thing that's going to separate Reef Labs from other ICP companies is when we give you the results on your elements. With if you look at when you get your test results from Reef Labs, there's those little 3 dots on each element. They do nothing, right?
I know, they do nothing. Come on.
Well-
Right-clicking, dragging, nothing. I was like, something's going on.
We love the fact that people click on that, because
Jerk.
when the MS test, he was thinking ahead, but he thought too far ahead.
Yeah.
When the total system water volume test is in place and you use the MS, because we're going to have 2 different kits, OES and MS, which is going to have the total system water volume. The OES will just be something for people to get so they have a good idea of what's in their system. If you want to fine tune things like I want to do and like you're working on doing, the MS is the way to go. The cost is going to be a little bit more, but what you'll be able to do is know your exact water volume at the time of the test, and click on those little 3 dots. And with the Reef Blueprint, because, okay, and I say Reef Blueprint, I'm not trying to promote things on your channel, because I know you offer other things up, but
It's
the
fine.
Reef Blueprint line is working really in conjunction with ACI and Reef Labs to dial in ionic balance in a reef system, which has never been achieved that we are aware of. We're this close with a couple of elements until I went away for 2 weeks, and now it's all out of whack again. But you'll be able to do the click on the element and say, okay, if you add this much of the reef blueprint line of that element, you'll get your tank in line with natural seawater levels.
Ionic balance.
So
yeah,
exactly. And to achieve that, there's no other ICP company out there unless they figure out their own method to do it. We've already got a patent pending on this so that nobody can use this because it only makes sense for us to have it and then license it out if people want to be able to do it.
So it can figure out the volume, including displacement?
That's what I love about it, because my ultimate goal, Mark, is to never, ever, ever do another water change. So when I'm farming corals, I'll be able to see what the displacement of in growth is.
That's crazy, because the branches are bigger. There's that's insane. Okay, I like it.
People are, what's the point? You don't need to do that. You know what? It's not for everybody. Right. I'm a geek like this. I love to know. I'm not a scientist. I don't have any degrees. I just understand a lot of different things. And I did go to school for biology, and I was working on it, but I was young and dumb and dropped out. And it's always still been a fascination of mine. My experience should speak for what I'm talking about. And I think that when the results are able to be shown from the corals that we're growing and farming over the years that we've been doing it, I have a little bit of credibility on that side of it, even though I don't have my credentials. I mean, I've been in a lot of ins and outs of ways to do things, and I've had ups and downs. I mean, I've failed miserably at some of the crazy ideas that I had, and I kick myself in the rear end for it all the time. But with the guidance of Chris Wood and Gene from Reef Labs, I've been able to do some things that I never thought were achievable in a reef system. And I feel very fortunate that I have some amazing people on my side that can take my crazy ideas and actually make them work. Because without the science, and that's my problem, is I have this idea and I don't understand the science behind it. But with those two, they figure it out, or they say, well, this, and this, but we're missing this. And then that triggers my brain to help them figure out what actually it is. So the trifecta of the three groups and the three companies work so well together with my crazy ideas. And I love it. I love it.
All right, let me scroll up and see if we have any questions from the audience, because I feel like we've beaten this conversation into the ground pretty well.
We have. We have. Actually, this is the last time I want to talk about it on any live stream ever.
Well, then I hope you didn't leave anything out, because it's the worst. You're like, damn it, I didn't mention such and such.
I'm going to do a YouTube video anyhow with a detailed thing that's like 15 minutes long, explaining the method. That's short and sweet. That way people don't have to go through all the other conversation on a live feed. That way I can just say, you know what, I've done plenty of live feeds. We're going to put this one up on ACI's website. They can watch it. But here's the one that gives you the details that you're looking for. Yeah,
here's what Jason Langer said. It's so odd not watching Chris walking around his shop as he's explaining Kalkwasser. And that's exactly what you wanted to do, but we couldn't get the connectivity to work. So, yeah. All right.
It's all right.
Let's see. And then you mentioned people have been sitting here so patiently.
I lost you for 1 second there. I mentioned what?
I did mention I wanted to. Oh, you had mentioned about, well, I dropped my thought because I want to do the questions. I'll come back to it. So Don says, I always mix my own calcium hydroxide and dripped cloudy at night, 9 to 11 DKH at 77 degrees with a pH of 8.3. Not so much a question, more how he explained his. And he was dripping it in cloudy. You want yours to be clear, right, before you use it?
Well, I try to eliminate variables. Okay, when you're putting Kalkwasser slurry in an aquarium, that means you're dosing undissolved Kalkwasser into your system. Okay, that's a variable that I'm not willing to put through my systems because I've got too much on the line. And any reefer that is doing it is playing with an unknown variable, which could be an explosion, not just fire. An explosion. What are you going to do if that undissolved Kalkwasser does settle in some area and then something triggers it to start going into solution and your pH goes from the 8.3 that you want to keep it at and it bumps it to 9? You got nothing to do to keep that from happening. Is it going to happen? I don't know. I don't want to know. Is it not going to happen? Again, I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't want to know. It's a variable. And reefing is all about eliminating variables. And that is one of the most important things that I can say to anybody that has a reef aquarium. Eliminate as many variables as possible, and you will have a much better experience keeping your corals happy and your fish.
Yeah.
I mean,
I completely
fish,
agree.
you know, variables are the devil to us as well, not just carbonic acid. Variables can be a complete devil. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's what this has derived from, is making sure that the variables are gone. You mentioned about 2 calcium reactors with somebody earlier.
Yeah, that one guy. Yeah.
I was literally on the verge of putting another calcium reactor on my farm in the back because it was melting 20 kilograms of reborn every month to a month and a half, and
Wow.
going through a bottle, 1 to 2 20-pound bottles of CO2 with
Yeah.
2 liters per minute going through the reactor at a 6.5 pH.
Jeez.
I'm like, I can't run any more effluent through my reactor.
Right.
What am I going to do?
Yeah.
When I turned on the Kalkwasser, I went down to 250 mLs a minute.
And you see, the Kalkwasser in the past was supposed to, like, you had the calcium reactor, which was lowering the pH a little bit, and the Kalkwasser brought it back up. It wasn't really, I mean, the way it was explained to me, the way I understood it, the way I read it, it was another tool, not a variable, another tool. So you had one thing did one thing, you had another thing did another thing. There were guys out there that would just run an entire coral farm, which would usually be a tank or two, that was just hooked up with Kalkwasser for top off, and that was it. They didn't have any calcium reactors, they weren't dosing alkalinity or calcium. It literally was just balanced from water changes and Kalkwasser addition, and that was very old school, simple way of doing it. But in your situation where you're dealing with so much CO2 going into the water and into the tank and, you know, coming out the effluent, did you have to use a CO2 scrubber? Because Roshan was mentioning he uses caulk and a CO2 scrubber on his skimmer to control the pH, and it's been working very well. Did you need a CO2 scrubber in your system with what you were doing?
I tried using CO2 scrubbing material, and it literally would last for about 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
And it was so expensive.
Yeah.
I even tried putting it in a big barrel, and it just didn't make any sense to me. I mean, I'm in the open air. I'm not in a home. I'm not in a warehouse that's sealed with air conditioning. It's whatever it is outside, it is inside.
Yeah.
And one of the variables that we didn't think about until probably about 6 months ago was we have probably the busiest highway in Florida that's literally 60 yards away from the front of my building.
Okay.
Well, how much carbon monoxide, how much CO2 is being put into the air from that every day, all day long? And then I started looking at all my systems, and I'm going, holy cow, look at this. The system closest to the front of the building has the lowest pH.
Ah.
The next one in was about 5 feet away, was only a minute difference.
Yeah.
And then as they got farther and farther away from the
front,
the
highway.
Literally,
That's
the pH
weird.
oh my gosh. I mean, that's what I mean.
Nice job correlating facts, though. That was a good catch. I like that you found that out. That's crazy.
It's just, you know, again, my head doesn't stop until I eliminate as much as I can possibly stop it.
Oh, and that's what I was going to say, is that I always tell people when you have a problem with your tank, disconnect everything and plug in one thing that you need at a time to isolate where the problem is. Because when you've got somebody that's got every kind of gizmo connected to their tank, they've got UV, they got the algae turf scrubber, they got the refugium, they got the caulk dose, they got the calcium reactor, they've got, you know, they're dosing Protibio, they're, you know, bringing in fresh air from outside. I mean, whatever. You start putting all those things in, and it's just too many pieces of gear. And then you have a thing to remove nitrate, and you got a thing to add nitrate, and you've got a thing that's sucking out phosphate. And it's just, there's so many different, it's like, stop. Okay, let's go down to the glass box, salt water, a water change, number one, will start to fix whatever's going on, and then plug in the protein skimmer and make sure it's working, because it helps off-gas CO2. And then what's the next step? You know, like, what can we do next? Well, I need to dose because, and, you know, again, I'm not doing the Kalkwasser thing, so I would be thinking alkaline, calcium, and magnesium are important elements for my system. What was the fourth one? The potassium? Because you said 4.
Potassium. Well, alkaline, calcium, magnesium, and pH are
pH. Okay.
keys. Potassium levels, you know, I mean, I learned about a lot about potassium too, and I like my potassium at like 450 to, yeah, it peaks up to 550 on occasions
Wow,
because of other. Yeah.
that's a lot.
Well, what we've seen with the 450 is the corals. Everybody's like, "Oh, everything will turn red." No, 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 no.
Mm.
When the potassium level gets up that high, everything literally just gets a shimmer shine to it. Like
Mm-hmm.
the greens are like, "Wow, that thing looks like it's glowing." The reds and the pinks are just insane. The blues look like they shimmer and shine
Yeah.
off of it. It really potassium really makes the colors pop.
Well, for
Um,
me, I had to dose potassium last year because my tank was deficit 200 ppm, and my
right.
rock did turn red. It wasn't. It was this reddish turf algae, and then I added
Yes.
a bunch of aquacultured urchins, and they ate it all off, and now I'm down to rock again. So it's
Yeah.
fine. But yeah, I do attribute that coming from dosing a lot of potassium over a 3-week period to bring it up to normal sea levels. Because I mean, like I went from 199 to 435. It was a big jump,
Nice.
and
Nice.
it
Well,
helped. Everything healed, and my rock all had this red stuff, and I was like, "Is that cyan?" I'm like, "No, it's not cyan. Unfortunately, it's really holding onto the rock." It was like a really short red turf algae of some kind that just
yeah.
exploded. But the urchins ate it, and I'm happy, so it's no problem. I wanted to put this on the screen again. So LG Auto Care, thanks you so much for your caulk method. Completely transformed his tank, and
Very
he can't
welcome.
thank
Thank
you
you.
enough for all the help you've given him.
It makes me feel so good. I mean, because I get so many things, so many times I get people saying I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm not wrong, and you're not wrong either. Whoever's doing their other method, everybody's right. If your method, whatever you're doing, if your corals look good and healthy,
Yeah.
it works. I'm never going to tell somebody they're wrong with what they're doing if they're
Get a night
getting
ring.
decent results. Mark is a
Yeah.
perfect example. He's got a beautiful reef aquarium behind him right there. And I had beautiful corals before I used this method, but
Yeah.
I'm always trying to improve
Right.
the
I think we all do
animals.
that.
Exactly. And this is just another way, for one, to keep your tank from being a money pit, in my
Yeah.
opinion, because they can get there. I mean, initially dosing 30 mLs of alkalinity buffer is nothing. But when you're up to dosing 150, 200, 300, 400
Yeah.
mils of alkalinity buffer, okay, something's got to give because you're going to be spending a lot of money on alkalinity buffer.
Yeah.
And if you make it yourself, are the raw materials that you're using and have access to, are they pure enough?
Right.
Okay, is there impurities in them that are going to take 6 months to a year to build up in your tank, and then you all of a sudden have a tank crash? Do you want to find that out? I don't think you do.
Yeah.
And I see it happen more times than none. Somebody buying, um, you know, pharmaceutical grade Kalkwasser or pharmaceutical grade soda ash or bicarbonate or whatnot, and they're
Yeah.
making their own. And in a year's time, all of a sudden, oh my gosh, my corals are getting STN and RTN. Why? I can pretty much tell most people why because of the ICP company that's close to me, because I figured out people's issues locally on more than one occasion.
From the
And
additives.
most of the times, it's the raw materials that are in alkalinity buffers.
Yeah.
Sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate are the two main components. And if they're not of high purity, they most likely have a little ion in there or element called cesium. And cesium, if you don't know what it is, it's a mildly radioactive element that's found in a lot of sodium salts. And it's minor. I mean, you're talking like probably parts per trillion in these raw materials. But the raw materials that we are using from the company that we purchased them from, he makes sure that the cesium level is not even detectable in the sodium based raw materials because we learned that cesium, as it builds and becomes parts per billion in your aquarium, when you get to like, I got to look at my notes, but I think it's at 44 parts per billion in cesium, you're going to start killing your corals. And you won't even know it because most ICP companies don't give you cesium results in your testing. I've looked at all, Gene and I have come collectively with the toxins that we test for because there's hundreds of them out there. But which ones do we know can possibly be in your system from your RO water, which arsenic is one of them, and it can pass through your RO filter. And you need to know that. If your filter's not doing its job and arsenic's passing through, arsenic building up can kill corals too. But we came up with these the toxins on the testing, and cesium was the root to almost everybody's STN and RTN on acroporas. Every single time an issue came about,
so here's mine. Mine is 0.008 milligrams per liter. That's
awesome.
Not parts per billion. So parts per billion would be like 8? No, 0.8.
8 parts per billion is what you are at.
That's what that number is, milligram per liter? Because when I was looking it up, here I'll zoom in.
It's roughly 8 parts per billion.
Yeah, 8. Roughly. Okay, so it's 8, not 0.8. It's 8 parts per billion. Yeah. And you're saying 44 is what I have to worry about. So guys, just so you know what you're looking at, this is my ICP from Reef Labs that I did 7 days ago, I guess. And I'm going to be sending off another sample on Monday because I'm working on an ICP talk from ACNA. And this is one part of the results. There's more to it. And so, I've been kind of going over certain things with Chris here, including copper, of all things. And we're not going to get into all that because that's a whole other topic. But it was just funny. He was like, oh, do you have enough copper? I'm like, copper? Why would I ever have copper in my tank? But yeah, cesium's like, yeah, my number's good. We're good on that one.
Yeah. So if anybody uses the Reef Labs and they have cesium levels reading 0.044 and it's not in the red, then something was weird with why it didn't get alerted. But you would get alerts. Bottom line, you'll have an alert that comes up that says, you better get that cesium level down, especially if you have acros in your tank. Acroporas are the most and the first to notice if you have an STN or an RTN event starting in your aquarium and you have cesium levels. I mean, you'll see it starting at around 0.03. Locally, you got a shop down here that was dosing a particular company's element, and I already tested it. Because I wanted to know. I paid Gene. I'm like, test this brand, this brand, this brand, this brand. And believe it or not, they're the major brands in the industry that are having these issues. And it infuriates me.
Well, I mean, I've been the guy that's been using baking soda that I just get from Walmart or Aldi or whatever. It's the stuff I'm going to bake cookies with. If I can't eat it, I feel like that's dangerous. So this seems food grade would be okay. But you're saying food grade's not safe enough. It has to be much better than that.
Yes and no. There's a couple of, people don't realize there's a couple of different grades of food grade. USP is the main food grade, but there are certain things that, because of science, they call it food grade, but they don't tell you actually how they did the grading on it anyhow, because people don't understand it, and they just need to say food grade. So USP is food grade. Above that is still food grade, and above that is still food grade, and you can keep going up the road.
Gotcha.
So when you have a baking soda product that is on the market, more than likely it's not just USP grade. More than likely it's above USP grade. USP grade from our testing has found that there was, and again, we're not measuring in parts per trillion with OES because it just can't do that. So we concentrate the solution to find out where it is. And then there's variables in there that we can't, control. We can try our best, but if you don't have scales measuring in, what is it, 100,000th of a gram?
I was going to say atomic weight.
You're talking about expensive equipment to do all the measurements. So we haven't gone that far, but we know that, when grading is being done, it has to be done with the proper equipment. So if the company putting it out there is saying it is food grade and you're using that, and you're not getting cesium in your water, you're golden. You're fine. Again, I'm not trying to say anything bad about companies that have products out there, but I need to call them and figure out a way to inform them of their issues. But
they're all watching this channel right now.
They don't have I don't have my credentials, so they're going to be like, "Who are you? You're nobody."
Here's a question for you. Andy wants to know: doesn't the styrofoam leach chemicals into your Kalkwasser?
We swap out our styrofoam lids about every 6 months because we know the caustic nature of Kalkwasser and the possibilities of things being broken down. And if I see something weird happening in my system, the great thing about having an ICP test on a weekly basis, I can just scoop up some of that solution and send it off. And usually the only thing we find as being an issue in a Kalkwasser solution is the aluminum levels. because aluminum and Kalkwasser were kind of, that's a contaminant of Kalkwasser.
Is it?
And
That's what I was going to ask you. Where's it coming from? So it's actually in the powder?
It is. And again, the grading of your Kalkwasser, the quality of that raw material is so important. If you go to the grocery store and you buy a 50-pound bag of Kalkwasser for $30 and think, well, I got enough Kalkwasser to last me for 10 years. No, you don't.
That's the kind I want to
buy. Hey, I'm all for it, but
yeah.
I don't want to hear the issues that can arise from it. So saving money on that aspect of it can cost you a lot more money.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, if you're losing your corals to it because aluminum really pisses off leathers, for example, it can be a real detriment. Yeah. All right, here's another one for you.
Yep.
Brent wants to know, I dose all for reef, so the only benefit I'd get is the pH boost. Could I hand dose caulk a couple times a day and get the pH bump?
Well, sure you can. You can get the pH bump out of it for sure, but all I don't know what all for reef is. I'm going to guess it's an alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium supplement that's all in one, correct?
Mm-hmm.
You know what it is?
Yeah, it's a Tropic Marin product I was thinking about putting on Caitlin's new reef tank because I'd like to have one single dosing pump that just kind of gives it a little bit, because it's literally all that's in there is live rock, live sand, a heater, and a power head, and that's it, and a light. It's the simplest tank ever. So
okay, so the all for reef sounds a lot like Kalkwasser to me when you break it all down, because I use the Kalkwasser to keep my pH from being suppressed. I also get the alkalinity value out of the Kalkwasser, and I get small amounts of calcium additive to it as well. Now, Kalkwasser alone will not keep my calcium level correct. Right. The calcium reactor is on there to help out when I'm not getting enough alkalinity value out of the Kalkwasser because the demand is so high, and also to help with the calcium levels. The only other thing I have to add to my systems is a little bit of calcium, and probably every 3 to 4 months I add a big dose of magnesium to raise it a good 50, 60 points to get it up there, and it takes a good 3 to 6 months for that to come down. My magnesium range needs to be, for me, between 1350 and 1500. Do I take it to 1500? No. I'm happy with 1400. Am I happy if it goes to 15? It doesn't bother me because I know it's where I like it in my range. And does it fluctuate a little bit? In a 3 to 6 month period of time, yes. My calcium level, usually I like it to between 390 and 420. And people say 390 is low. No, it's not. Seawater is 390. So as long as my levels don't go below natural seawater, which is 390, and they stay at 420, I'm good to go. And I don't let my alkalinity fall below the 8.3 mark, so my calcium reactor takes care of that. So to answer your question, if you were to put the Kalkwasser solution on the way I do it, you wouldn't need the all-for-one, which is going to be a cheaper method for you to keep your stability of your pH, where you're ultimately, you ask if you could put the Kalkwasser in to help with the pH.
Yeah.
If you switch over to Kalkwasser, dosing it exactly the way we do it, you're going to get the alkalinity values that are going to go through the roof, and you're going to not worry about it because your corals are going to look amazing, and your pH is going to be where you need it to be, and your calcium is probably going to stay where it needs to be, and you should have to dose Kalkwasser and Kalkwasser only. You just monitor the other ones, and if you have them falling below where you liked them before, supplement, and it'll save you money.
I was listening to what you're describing, and my brain was rehashing our conversation, and it made me think how I've always been worried about Kalkwasser overdose, but I do regularly see people doing alkalinity overdoses. Their dosing pump fails. There's something goes on, and all the liquid drained or siphoned in, and it's just like, so we just traded off one disaster for another. I mean, it's really hard to get everything perfectly safe all the time.
That was a concern of mine too, Mark, and so that's what I like to be, the control.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't like having the controller. I mean, but I do like it now that I have it, because I honestly wouldn't be able to achieve some of these goals that I've set without the help of the Apex. So I control the control.
Yeah. All right, this leads into this right here. Reefkeeper says, was Chris nervous when you first implemented the steady pH and not worry about alkalinity, especially with a coral farm?
Yes. I mean,
or did you try with a smaller tank first?
No, well, my wife's listening to this and she's going, I told you not to do it on the main farm system. Why are you doing it on the main farm system? Straight face like that. And I'm like, well, you got to start somewhere, right? So
Yeah.
without great risk is no reward. And if you have good people on your side helping you do the process and you do it in a very conservative way, why wouldn't I start it on the system that I'm really trying to dial in
Yeah,
first?
that makes sense.
And I started everything slow. I didn't do this. I tell people how to do this, but I don't tell them to put my rule to the exact pH value in to start.
Right.
To do
That's
what
what you
we
told me. You
do.
told me go 8.1. Don't
No, yeah,
don't shoot for 8.3.
I just tell everybody, okay, your ultimate goal is to get your pH rule so it stops dosing Kalkwasser at 8.25 to 8.29. Your
Right.
pH is suppressed. You don't want to program that immediately, because if you do, you're going to be in the world of hurt because
Yeah.
you're going to overdose your system. So you put your average pH in that rule. So then there's always a valley, there's always a peak, and there's always an
Yeah.
average every day. So
Just
you
lock
don't
in
want
the
to
average.
build.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I
And
like
every
that.
day walk that average up until you meet your ultimate goal. And then you just continue to maintain everything consistently with a caulk solution, not a stirrer.
Stirrer.
I repeat, if you're using a stirrer,
Yeah.
you're not using
Right.
my method. It
Yeah.
will work, but it will also not work.
So
I
on
can't-
Caitlin's tank, I just want to make a point. Like if I wanted to do just a little Kalkwasser thing under hers, the problem is that tank doesn't evaporate anything. So I'm trickling in what I need for my magic numbers, and my tank is just overflowing because I've got a solid lid on there so that my expensive fish can't jump out. And I didn't want to do a screen top because it's directly under an air conditioner vent that will just chill the
Again.
tank. So it's like but it's crazy. It has so little evaporation. I literally look at the water line, and it's the same amount all the time. I haven't had to pour anything in. It's been 3 weeks. I mean, it's crazy.
Probably 100 mils a day
Yeah.
or less. And that's the
Producer
thing,
Reef
'cause
wants to know, where can we find your method to follow? So is this on ACI? Is this on Reef Labs? Where is this?
I
in your
did.
head?
I think the first time. What did you say?
It's in your head.
It is. Yeah, there's too much up here sometimes. It gets kind of jumbled together. I did if you go to ACIAquaculture.com, we have an entire section of videos that actually I think my wife has put every single video that I have done, as well as every single video that has been done on reefs.com. This video right here will go up on Melv's Reef, and we will be promoting Mark here. So it's going to be on our website. This video will go up on our website as well.
And I'll
So
put the
I do
links in the
have-
video description after we're done, so that way anyone that wants to follow can just navigate
Exactly.
right to it. That'll be no problem at all.
It works well. So the method that we do will work on most any system. If you have a system like your daughter's case, Mark, honestly, I'm sure there's a way to figure out how to get it to work, because I'm sure the alkalinity demand can't be that high in it right away, and the calcium and the magnesium. But I'm sure your pH is suppressed in that tank. I mean, there's
Probably.
not a.
I mean, there's an air stone pushing air in it 24/7. It looks very old school. Everyone's like, man, this reminds me of a tank from the 90s because I just have this air stone bubbling. But the bubbles hide all the wires in the back corner. It's like the perfect mask. And it provides,
That's awesome.
I believe it adds air. I don't know. I actually want to talk to Craig Bingham about that. Does air, when you pump air into a tank, are you adding air or are you just moving water? Do you know?
You're moving water and you're scrubbing CO2. You're not, this is one of the things that I used to think, and I was proven wrong. And I love to be, I love to somebody to tell me that I was wrong about something, because that means I learned. And I was always under the impression that calcium reactors they would add oxygen to your water. It's the farthest from the truth. They do not add a bit of oxygen to your water.
You mean
scrub
skimmers?
the CO2 from your water.
Yeah, skimmers. You said calcium reactor. Okay, yeah, proteins. I know, because a lot of people say if you take the collection cup off and just let it bubble over like a volcano, you're adding air. And I don't think that's true.
It's not. It's not, because you got positive and negatively charged, the air bubbles going into your system, and all they do is attract, nutrient ions. And we did actually, having Gene with the ICP, we actually got the idea to test skimming. Because I had it was so cool. people were like, oh, well, your skimmer's removing your carbonates and it's removing your calcium, it's removing your magnesium and all your
trace
majors.
elements.
No, it doesn't. It removes bacteria, dead bacteria.
That's it.
And
Phytoplankton. It can pull out phyto. I know that.
yes. And among those dead bacteria, it does not remove any of your major elements.
Nice.
It removes all of your minors and your traces because those bacteria need those minors and traces to thrive in your aquarium.
Okay.
And that's the reason why all the minor and trace elements showed up in the skim mate, was because all the dead bacteria that had those minor and trace elements in their tissue or in their cell body. That's the reason why all the minor and traces were in there. And phosphorus.
Yeah.
Tons of phosphorus. So I used to think that they didn't remove phosphate. But if they're removing phosphorus, they're removing phosphate.
Yeah.
And they remove nitrates. So there's a lot of things that I was really, really kind of take a step back and go, after the test results came in, because it made me rethink everything about a protein skimmer. I mean, how beneficial are protein skimmers? They're so beneficial to your aquarium that anybody that's not using them in a closed system that doesn't do regular water changes is actually allowing buildup of, phosphorus and nitrogen and dead bacteria, which are creating it. So I'm guilty. I still have 2 tanks or 2 systems that don't have protein skimmers on. But for the size of the protein skimmer I need and the amount of water changes I do weekly, because we actually do all of our packing out of those systems, I'm not going to do it because it's been working for, 15 years now that we've been in business. Yeah. It's been working for 15 years. It's not broke. I'm not going to fix it. It's another piece of equipment I have to maintain. And with water changes, I can combat that. And all my farm systems have protein skimmers on, and the benefits are huge.
All right, Dusk194 says, does Chris recommend a brand of magnesium hydroxide and strontium hydroxide, I guess, SR, to curb falling MG and SR like Brightwell, or would you recommend dosing magnesium and strontium separately for the caulk, separately of the caulk?
I can tell you this, strontium hydroxide isn't cheap if you get real good quality strontium hydroxide. 2, it is also a divalent cation that does not dissolve very well in water, but when you do get it to dissolve in the water, you're talking about a more caustic pH or higher pH than even sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide, which are monovalent cations, and I don't recommend you touch them. So strontium hydroxide, if you get it maximum concentrated in a solution and it goes on your skin, you're in trouble. Do not mess with strontium hydroxide. Magnesium hydroxide is so weak, it's only like a 10.5 pH. There's no point in even messing with with magnesium hydroxide, because it's not going to do what you want it to do, and your magnesium levels to hydroxide levels are going to cause your magnesium levels to rise and rise and rise and rise. So Kalkwasser is the only thing I ever taught people how to use. Okay, I lied. I made the mistake of telling one person how to use potassium hydroxide. The biggest mistake of my reefing career, because I told him to be very careful with it, and he didn't listen to anything I had to say, and he nuked his entire aquarium because he ended up upping the amount going in his systems. I mentioned earlier 3 drops in 5 seconds. Okay, that's in 2,200 gallons. I'm using potassium hydroxide and sodium hydroxide. 3 drops per 5 seconds. Okay, people don't really take that seriously. It's a serious issue if people are trying to use this stuff. You need to know what you're doing. I had guidance from a marine scientist teaching me. I'm getting chills right now because it freaks me out that anybody wants to use strontium hydroxide, sodium hydroxide, or potassium hydroxide without knowing really the true dangers of them. He went to 1 drop every 10 seconds in a 150-gallon tank. Walked away from it. It took 15 minutes to kill his entire aquarium.
Wow.
Don't play with it, please. Please don't play with strontium hydroxide, sodium hydroxide, or potassium hydroxide unless you know what you're doing. I'm getting kind of fiery about this because I don't want anybody to relate that back to me.
Right.
Do.
I think that's why there are so many brands on the market. When you think about it, we always complain about this. You and I even complain about it. Like, the bottles we buy are watered down. There's a reason they're watered down. There's a big reason why they're watered down. I mean, right now I'm dosing cobalt into my reef, which is insane, okay? And Chris said, now Mark, I want you to put in 1 drop in 100 milliliters of liquid, and then I want you to put in 3 milliliters a day. And I'm looking at my bottle of cobalt. I have 60 milliliters, and I used 1 drop, and I had to mix it into a urine cup, and it's going to take 34 days to use up the cup of 1 drop. And I'm just like, I just want to put the drop in my reef. And he's like, don't you do it. Don't you dare. Well, so I'm putting in 3 milliliters of a drop every day. It's insane.
You're going to find, and listen, this is a guideline to dose a sterile system that has no cobalt in it. Mm-hmm. Just like alkalinity, just like calcium, just like magnesium. You know, you can go by the guidelines that are on those bottles and dose it in a sterile system, and you'll achieve the exact goal you want to achieve.
Yeah.
Just like cobalt, okay? If you want to put your cobalt level to natural seawater levels and you don't have any living organisms in there, you're going to want to put in exactly the way the directions and the way we told you to do it.
Yeah.
But because you have corals growing in there, you have bacteria, you have algae, you have an algae scrubber, you're going to find that we gave you that as your guideline to start your initiation of cobalt in your system. And as your bacterial populations that are growing in your system rely on that cobalt, you're going to find that cobalt dosage needs to go up and up and up and up.
Okay, good. Like, so I don't have a 10 lifetime supply of cobalt.
It's no different. Yeah, exactly. It's no different than calcium, alkaline, and magnesium dosing. People think that when you put in your minor and trace elements, that you put them in, you forget about it. No, that's the farthest from the truth, because they're going to be utilized in your system by every single organism that needs it.
Yeah.
And right now, if you have a system that's never had cobalt dosed in it, there's no bacteria that thrive on that cobalt. You got algae that's growing in there that thrives on it, and it's going to start using it. But as the bacterial populations, the microbe populations, and the algae that are growing in your tank are changing because the minor and traces are present now, the balance in your system that can be achieved will blow your mind. I mean, we were literally 2 elements away from the balance before I went on vacation. And now I came back and my ICP results, I'm like,
oh. Why did you leave? What were you thinking?
Well,
you were so close.
Here's what happened. I had my minor and traces on a dosing pump, and every week that I got my test results back, that dosing, that the concoction that I came up with was keeping everything but 2 of the elements right in the green area.
Right.
Cobalt and silicone were deficient. So I was scared of the cobalt like everybody else would be, because of 1 drop being so much in concentration. But the system is so big that I had to put 2 drops in. So I had that amount programmed in the solution. I put 60 drops in the concoction, and it still was showing deficient. So I started off with putting 2 more drops in. Week goes by, ICP test, deficient. What? 2 more drops. So I was up to 4 drops on top of the 2 drops, and I'm still showing deficiencies.
You are one crazy mad scientist using 6 drops of cobalt. What are you thinking? Your cesium's going to skyrocket. All right, let's go to another question. Luke wants to know, can you share the coding for the dose, please?
I did share the coding for the dose in the beginning of the stream.
Mark, that was the dose code? That was not, that was a pH code? Oh, the other one, yeah.
Okay, that's the rule. The rule that's in the advanced section of that dose pump you're using for dosing Kalkwasser. It's simple. If pH greater than your average on your apex for that day, then off.
Yeah, this one.
And then the next day in the evening, before the dosing commences again, you look at your average and you change that value in there to the new average for the day.
So the modify interval, is that a dose command or no?
That's a dose command, correct.
Why is it for 24 hours then and not for 12, since you only want to do it during the first part? during the
Well,
night?
I tried that. I tried doing it for the 12 hours, but I wasn't getting enough Kalkwasser dosing per dose
Okay.
for it to keep it stable.
And that's why you double it so it just uses
Because,
it up.
right,
Gotcha.
because I want to dose half of that amount,
Yeah.
and the amount being dosed per dose is a lot greater than
Yeah.
if I had it programmed another way.
Yeah.
It actually worked. And
Okay.
honestly, that was not my genius idea. That was just me falling upon adjusting the modified interval
Yeah.
and the amount being dosed because of the rule. That's what it kind of just fell on my lap, that
Yeah.
it only doses for 12 hours because my dosing or my light cycle is a 12-hour light cycle, and the pH of my system doesn't get suppressed below the rule
Right.
pH value until the lights have been out for anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half.
Gotcha. So it
So
starts at the right time, all kind of automatically, like science.
exactly.
All
That's
right.
why I say I used to not like my apexes, but
Yeah.
I absolutely love them now because
Nice.
I'm not going to get up if I'm sleeping after the lights go out, or stay at my farm until
Yeah, you wanna go
9:30
home.
in the evening
Yeah.
to start the dosing. You know what I mean? Or it just made things easy.
So
The rate of
Flash Can
dosing.
wants to know, is the rate of dosing matter? Does it matter if it's 100 milliliters a minute versus 2 milliliters a minute?
To copy our method exactly, it has to be done with an apex. Can you do it without the apex? Yes, you can. I learned another way to do this method without the apex, and it was just me thinking hard about what else we do and how can we incorporate. The easiest way you can do this if you don't have an apex is to buy, again, I'm going to say a company, Milwaukee pH controller, and a really good quality dosing pump that you can program to dose for a 12-hour period of time. Or actually, what I would do is kind of get a figure. You need to monitor your pH and find out where your pH is below your average for the day, and then say, okay, I want my dosing, or I want my programming to be for that 12 hours, because it's usually a 12-hour period where it's below that time. So you program your dosing pump for your exact evaporation to be dosed in 12 hours, and then you plug that doser into your pH controller. And then the pH controller, when the pH gets below your set point that you want it to come on, powers up your doser and starts your process
Right.
of dosing the Kalkwasser for that 12-hour period. And when it gets to where it needs to be, it shuts it down. That's simple. It's still not going to dial it in with as tight of a ratio or a tight of a pH where like we have, but it's going to be better than suppressed pH, in my opinion, because you're still going to be so close to what we're doing that you're going to be achieving some goals that you never thought you could achieve. And your corals literally will show you and tell you how happy they are without you looking at your alkalinity number skyrocketing to 13 and
Right.
you going, oh, what am I going to do? Get the alkalinity down, get it down. You don't have to worry about it, because your corals will tell you everything you need to know when your pH is stable, no matter what your alkalinity is, unless it's below 8.3.
All right, let's do some more questions. Let's try and do
Yes.
rapid fire.
Okay.
Trent wants to know, what if you way underdose or dilute your Kalkwasser mix in your top-off container? I guess he's just wanting to know, does that do any benefit? I would think it adds some benefit.
With the method that we're doing, and you're not maximum saturated, you're just going to overdose the amount of Kalkwasser into your system, and you're going to dilute your salinity. Bottom line.
Yeah. All right. Luke wants to know, when is Captivate line coming to the UK?
I'm working on that with Chris right now. So I actually talked to him briefly about it the other day, and we just got so much going on right now with the company basically being young and trying to get things started up. And right now production is all done by one person, and that's the great thing, is it's quality control. So bringing on too much all at once is not a good idea, because I don't want Chris to be overwhelmed with not being able to fill orders for us and the other distributors he has for it right now. So maybe in 6 months to a year, depending on whether the automated bottling system that he's developing is going to work properly, and he can have just a bottler take care of doing it for him. But that right now, it's all being hand filled by him himself.
All right. This one was for me. What is the name of the coral that looks like a brain behind you? That would be a pavona coral. It's a cactus pavona, and it grows in that interesting shape. I've had it for a super long time, probably 10 years.
Lettuce pavona. I love that coral.
You call it lettuce pavona?
I call it lettuce pavona.
All right.
But I don't know. Maybe is it super paper thin or is it a little bit thicker?
No, it's pretty thin.
Neon green?
No, mine is not. Mine's kind of in the yellowish color.
Oh, you need a neon green one if you like that coral a lot. I got plenty of neon green.
But I got tons of that. I'm going to come visit you and steal some of your corals. Don't worry. It's going to happen at some point.
Whenever you get a chance.
Trent wanted to know, what does it cost to do a test? You're talking Reef Labs. Those are about $40. I checked 2 websites. One was $40, one was $45. I don't know why the other one gets $5 extra, but
maybe they misunderstood. But MSRP on that is $39.99.
Yeah.
So I
add it to my website as well.
I'll figure out who it is. I'll send an email out to all the customers that are purchasing them and saying, hey, if you're selling it for $45, yeah, it's $39.99. If you're not selling them, that's the reason why.
Yeah. Joshua says, what is a good Kalkwasser? What's a good one?
The only one that I use, the only one that I trust because I know who's doing the testing on it, and that's Captivate's Reef Blueprint. It's Isolate CaCO2. It is all we use in here, and I go through 5 kilograms a month.
5 kilos. That's a lot. That is and how often do you have to like clean out the containers, like scrub them clean and start fresh? Or since honestly, it dissolves so nicely, you just make more?
It's a myth. I mean, I don't ever clean them out. I can't say I never clean them out, but I don't just take a day and just take the Kalkwasser bins off and clean them out. I literally went probably 8 months without cleaning them out, and there was settlement at the bottom, and it was getting thicker and thicker, and I think that's the reason why when I looked at the bottom, I could see all the way down, and I'm like, whoa. The barrel's only this big around at the bottom, but it's getting into that wider part. Let's clean this out so that way when I dip down too low, I'm not dipping into a slurry. One
armed reefer, wow, this guy works with one hand, says, nice. I've been using the system for a few months and would like to know how often to calibrate the pH probes.
The pH probes are super important to make sure that they are consistently accurate.
Yeah.
We use that handheld MW102 Milwaukee to go around and check our pH in our solutions. And we also rely on the apexes. So I calibrate that handheld one that we use. I calibrate it monthly. I use that then to check my pH of my systems to look at what the pH on the apex is saying. And I know they're never going to be dead on with each other. There's just too many variables to make sure that they're dead on. I tell anybody that is using the same process, and honestly, you have to let that handheld one soak in your system for a good 20 to 30 minutes before it settles out and balances out properly, is what I've learned. So I usually just stick the probe in with the temperature sensor and walk away from it, come back in 20 minutes, turn it on. And if it's not 0.03 to 0.05, within 0.03 or 0.05, plus or minus what the apex says, I either calibrate the MW102, and most of the time I've already had calibrated that, before I had to calibrate the apex.
Yeah. So
I will then, most of the time, calibrate the apex and then do the same thing
while you got
sure
the solution
within that range.
Yeah.
Because 0.03 to 0.05 is not so bad. Remember, 0.1 is 10 times. So 0.03 to 0.05 I don't like, but with a discrepancy between 2 different companies and 2 different pieces of equipment, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So getting it dialed in exactly, I'm not a lab. I don't have lab grade equipment, and I can't afford it. So.
Right. Okay, so I got a couple more comments from Dusk. First one, he just said, I want to clarify, Brightwell's Calc comes with a formulation of magnesium and strontium hydroxides in it to match lab testing of aragonite. I agree not to touch it. It's pure, sorry for the mix-up. And then follows up with, any chance ACI will propagate the immortal tort for the rest? Is that a
It's
chance?
funny you say that because Jake Adams sent me the Immortal Tort about a year and a half ago, and I released the Immortal Tort as Aquacultured about. Oh, when did we do that? That was in. I released Immortal Tort for the first time in January
Oh,
of
okay.
this
So
year.
it's starting to be available.
So it was available, and unfortunately, my previous group of employees had some issues. I ended up creating 3 colonies of Immortal Tort for redundancy, and one of them got killed, and I was really really upset about that. But luckily, because of me being the way I am, I had 2 colonies left. But unfortunately, I don't have enough with those 2 colonies right now to break it down and to offer up wholesale, 50 to 100 fragments of that coral. So I'm going to have to say that in January, maybe February or March of next year, talk to your local fish store. We broadcast all of our new releases, whether we release them in the past or releasing something new on our Facebook and Instagram page. When Immortal Tort is available, believe me, I've got a list of people waiting for Immortal Tort to come back. When it comes back, it'll be on Facebook or Instagram. So like us on Facebook or Instagram, and you will get all the latest updates for all the newest releases, which in the next 3 months should be close to 150 additional corals to our list of 100 already. So
that is too many! Too many calls! Hey, Amanda, I want to thank you for the super chat. I saw that trickle through earlier. She said it was for my cookie fund. And, I think she just wants me to buy more baking soda is what she's trying to do here. But, thank you so much for doing that, Amanda. Listen, we've had you on here for 2 whole hours. Too long. Wow. I appreciate your going into so much depth of this information. I am kind of on the fence about maybe possibly trying something down the road, but not now. I'm in the middle of a different experiment. But I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued.
Real quick to you. When you're comfortable with the things you're doing right now, you let me know, and let's incorporate the Kalkwasser so you can get the benefits of what you're doing now and the benefits of Kalkwasser.
You'll be like, now you don't need those other 9 bottles because it's all in the Kalkwasser. No, but this is really interesting stuff, and I do appreciate you coming on because I have for a fact been telling people for half a decade or a decade I avoid Kalkwasser at all costs. I used it once in my life for about 9 months, and it was just messy, and I just didn't like it, and I didn't see any benefits. And I helped a friend with this reef tank, and he had so much sedimentation in the reef. It was a bare-bottom tank. But every rock you picked up, just smoke came off of it because he was a huge Kalkwasser user. And forget the tank, the sump, unbelievable amounts of kalk were in there. You would think he was throwing a spoonful at a time into the sump, which he wasn't doing. But it was never completely dissolving, I guess, or building
That's
up.
why my concern was exactly that. That's why I decided to put it on a float and draw the clear effluent only, and then do that. I love your idea. Trust me, I'm going to go out here with my PVC cutters and custom half-inch PVC pipe and make a stand that sits on the bottom. Right after we're done talking to this, I got 9 systems to do that too. So thanks for giving me more work, Mark.
I'm just glad you didn't say, Mark, can you fabricate something out of acrylic that I can just drop in the bottom like a nice little donut? That would be awesome. But you didn't, so I don't have to do that now. As we wrap up the show, guys, I want to remind you today is Water Test Saturday. That means test everything on your tank, not just the things Chris thinks about. Talk about everything else because we still do the old method, not the Chris method. And so we want to check our alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, nitrate, phosphate, temperature, pH. We want to know all those things and potassium. And then if you want to know anything else, you're going to have to get a Reef Labs kit of your own to start looking at things like cesium. Because we don't want to overdose anything. We want to use the right amounts.
Exactly.
That next weekend there will not be a live stream. I'll be on vacation in California. Well, it's a work vacation, but it's a vacation. And so I do thank you guys for tuning in today and hanging out with us. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time. And I hope that this answers a lot of questions for a lot of people. And like I said, in the video's description, I'll have links to all the things he gives me, so that way you guys can follow the the trail down the rabbit hole into his world.
Thank you.